oh my God, you just told me who my character was. Two goals, needs, wants, longings, etc. that are in direct opposition to each other. At the start of the story, she wants something, but then the inciting incident happens and she has to want something else. And so Hello, hello, hello. Today I am going through the character creation process in detail for one of the characters in my new book. And I'm doing this because I've recently learned 2 techniques for finding a character that honestly feel magical to me because they really help certain concepts. They really help certain concepts kind of like slot into place for me. And they really like help me understand my characters. So I'll be talking about these as part of my overall process. And we're gonna go from the very first kernel of the character all the way to where I am now, which is in the first draft, and all of the resources I used to get there. So I always start characters generally with their role in the story. So in this one, the character's name is Lewis, and I looked through all of my notes, and my earliest note about him, very, very earliest, was Charlotte's supportive older brother. And Charlotte is the main protagonist. This book has 6 POVs. Lewis is one of them. His sister Charlotte is kind of our main protagonist we're following, but everybody has equal POV time. So I had that. And then, because I have 6 POVs in this book, I wrote a character arc statement for each POV. And I actually got this from the Story Grid Editors Roundtable podcast. And the basic structure is when, a character does X thing or experiences X thing, they must decision, and then a new sentence with the outcome. So this is the one that I wrote for Lewis. At the time, I was quite literally matching my characters to love story plots from Love Actually. And so see if you can guess which plot that he came from. I think it's pretty obvious, but tell me in the comments which plot this one came from. When a nerdy guy falls for the beautiful exchange student, he must convince his broken-hearted sister that love is real or else give the girl up. He enlists Charlotte's help, makes a fool of himself performing, and they come up with a way to tell the girl how he feels. So I will say that this has changed a little bit because the theme of my story is different than the theme of Love Actually, and the characters are obviously different. So this has evolved a little bit beyond the focus on the sister, but I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit. So once I had that statement written, I said, okay, I have an idea of what his journey is. I have an idea of what his story is going to be. Now what? And so then I started brainstorming. He's someone who wants to get the girl, who wants to date this beautiful exchange student. He's going to join the performance in order to do so. He has a sister who I'm assuming he feels very protective of and loves. And, nerdy, makes a fool of himself. There's something there. To start brainstorming, I actually jotted down the 7 story points from the Anatomy of Story, which are weakness, need, goal, opponent, plan, battle, and self-revelation, and the 5 things from the Story Grid. I'll just read you what I filled in. I didn't fill all of these in. It was too early. So goal, get Isabella, the beautiful exchange student, to like him. And then self-revelation, he doesn't have to be showy or popular. He just has to be his genuine self. Interesting early manifestation of that self-revelation. That came from basically that idea of like making a fool of himself performing. Is he self-conscious of being nerdy? That kind of thing. And then in terms of the story grid, I had inciting incident. He hears Isabella is in the Nutcracker play, and he hears that his sister is the director. And then I have blank spaces. I think for my progressive complication turning point, I jotted down he does the big gesture, and Isabella is confused, upset, unimpressed, runs away. Clarice says to give up on her, try one more time. Climax, lays his heart bare, privately, vulnerable, resolution, she agrees to go on a date with him. So we have a little bit of the inkling of what's going on. So as I'm brainstorming here, I'm having trouble with the nerdy part, but come up with a way to tell the girl how he feels, does the big gesture, laying heart bare, vulnerable, all that stuff is interesting to me. Also in the original statement, making a fool of himself by performing. So that's really interesting to me too. So maybe the character is less about the sister and more about him performing and connecting with the girl. And her name is Isabella. And at this point, I'm jotting down touch points I can use to connect with the character. So I jotted down things like think cheertastic vibes. If you don't know that, it's a cheertastic Christmas miracle by John Green, which is part of the book Let It Snow. It was published, I don't know, 10 years ago? It is Maureen Johnson, John Green, Maureen Johnson, and Lauren Miracle. The king and queens of YA middle grade, YA in I don't know, 2010, 2011? The best. Okay, sorry. Going back. Anyways, I wrote down think cheertastic vibes because the plot of this, he has a cheertastic vibe. That's the feeling I want to be in his story. I wrote down, he feels about performing the way I feel about sports, which makes sense to me, and also Fred Weasley. So these are all the little touch points of okay, this is who the character is, just trying to understand who they are. And just naturally, as I'm, brainstorming, writing, things come to mind, bits of things he might say or others might say that reveal character. So I wrote down the line, "We don't believe it, Lewis," which is Charlotte. I didn't say this, but I know that would be Charlotte saying to Lewis that they don't believe his performance as Fritz. I also have written down, "I'm the fun guy," so that's something that Lewis would say. "I'm the fun guy. I can't do this scene." I also have a little monologue I wrote for him that goes like this. "There's always that moment on The Bachelor where the guy demands the girl opens up. It's mean, frankly. They're on TV, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people made stuff up. I don't see how so many of them could tell the truth like that on TV for the whole world to see." So, is that going to make it in the story? Perhaps not. But I really find thinking of relevant things and writing the character's opinion on them can be super helpful. And do I have every character's opinion on The Bachelor written down? No, The Bachelor has nothing to do with the story, but this does give a lot of insight to me into that's his opinion. He's really projecting, and it kind of gives more insight into his psyche. So at this point, I've been playing around with some of those thesaurus books, like the Emotion Thesaurus, the Conflict Thesaurus, and there are great resources in those appendices for character development and stuff, and I tried two for Lewis. The first one, I don't remember the names of either of these. I will try to put the links below. The first one is this big chart. I don't know if you can see that. Big chart. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4 big sections. And it's goal, motivation, conflict, stakes for plot and arc. So for goal, the plot question is, what does the character want to do or achieve? And he wants to go out with Isabella. He also wants to perform well. He's seeking connection. Arc, what must be resolved? He needs to learn that vulnerability is a strength. His inner life is valid. And it keeps going. God, this sounds so trite when you just write it down in your notebook as this is what they're learning. Hopefully when it goes on the page, it will be a lot more nuanced. All right. So the second one, that's that one chart. The second one is this little smaller chart on the bottom, which is wound, outer motivation, and inner conflict. So his outer motivation is get the girl. His inner motivation is experience a true intimate connection with others. And his inner conflict is his fear of vulnerability keeps him from developing connection with Isabella and with the audience together at the same time. I have done this one on the bottom. So the top one with goal, motivation, conflict, stakes, plot, arc, I found it a little repetitive, so I only did this one for Lewis. I didn't do it for all the characters, but the one on the bottom, the wound, outer motivation, inner conflict, I did that for all 6 of my POV characters. Except I didn't. I didn't fill out the wound because I love Story Genius so much, so just jotting something like parents' divorce led to fear of vulnerability or something, it just felt a little or like insufficient. So I dealt with that elsewhere and didn't add it to this chart, which is fine because it's just a tool. All right, so at this point, we're at the point where we are all about nailing the misbelief. So I started to sort of free write, and I like to mix together fears and misbeliefs because I think fear is a powerful motivator that can lead to some of these misbeliefs. So I wrote down, I know he's afraid of being unliked, disliked, afraid of vulnerability, and that comes sort of to the misbelief eventually, where if he's emotionally vulnerable, if he expresses who he truly is, his messy emotions, all that stuff, he'll be undesirable and unlikable. And what I've started to do is, with this book in particular, because it's a little bit more, it's not more interior, but there's just a lot of characters to have these arcs with, is psychological research on them. So I have another character who, like, typical high school, really, really, really wants to be popular and cares a lot about, like, her status and all that stuff. And when I was working on her, I started thinking, like, okay, it's a status story, she cares about her status. What the hell does that mean? Like, the word lost all meaning to me. So I started reading articles about, like, what is status? How does it motivate us? I picked up a book on status, etc. With Lewis, I started reading about the fear of vulnerability. And what I found was really, really helpful, especially weirdly the opening lines of these articles, which is getting to one of my first big character revelation tool thingies that I want to tell you about. Okay, so here are the opening lines of 2 articles that I found helpful. Ever felt terrified to tell a boyfriend or girlfriend how much you needed their help or support? Or perhaps you've avoided bringing up an issue with your significant other because you didn't want to seem inadequate or unlovable. Maybe it was you who bounced on a partner or friend when their needs felt too overwhelming. And another one, at its core, the fear of vulnerability means that a person is afraid of opening up or getting close to other people. They are uncomfortable with intimate moments and often have defense mechanisms that stop relationships before they intensify. There is often some component of low self-esteem that motivates maintaining some distance. Now, I found this really, really helpful because I have things jotted down, like, okay, he's afraid that if, like, he is emotionally vulnerable, if he opens up, he's basically gonna, like, get rejected, he's afraid, blah, 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 but I don't have the way it's manifesting, right? So that's all very interior, which is cool. You'll hear that in his interiority, but it has to be like, what's the external part? And I find the research very helpful in going from the interior to the external. So when we're talking about here, okay, they're afraid of opening up or getting close to other people, uncomfortable with intimate moments, that's helpful, so they would shy away. Defense mechanism, so a defense mechanism to stop that from happening. Can't ask for help, avoid bringing up issues that are problems. All of these things are ways that the fear, misbelief, etc. Are going to manifest or could manifest in the story. So this is the first technique that I've learned. It's not too different from Story Genius, but putting it this way was really, really helpful to me. I was reading a book about acting and teaching acting, specifically to children, just because it was, like, simple. And I know nothing about acting, although I love theater. And this is a theater book. So in that book, the authors emphasized how important it was to move away from adjectives to describe characters towards active, actable verbs. So what they said is, nobody can really play shy or important. But what you can say is, to a kid who's acting, this is the kind of person who avoids meeting others' eyes, who will hide behind her friends when they're meeting new people. Or for important, this is the kind of person who expects to be treated with deference by everyone she meets. This is the kind of person who walks into a room and assumes everyone is looking at her. So that is the phrase that I love. That's basically the tool. It's verbs instead of adjectives, but very specifically, it's filling out this is the kind of person who. And I find that so helpful for describing characters. So helpful. I love it. For another character, and it was actually, so I'll get into, I don't know if this is interesting, I'll edit it out. If not, I'm doing this group mentoring program where you get peer feedback on writing and you get feedback from a published author. It's called Group Mentoring by Write Mentor. And it's a really great program. I really enjoy it. And I sent some pages to the author to give me feedback on, and she sent back a description of one of my characters. And she was saying, like, this is what she said: this is the kind of kid the teacher would put in charge of the classroom when she had to step outside. This is a girl who has been called mature for her age since she was 4 years old. And I was like, oh my God, you just told me who my character was. It was on the page, but not to the extent that it could have been. And she just told me what it was, and it just made perfect sense. This is the kind of person who, this is the kind of kid who, like, amazing. So helpful. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, I need to write this kind of description that she did for this one character for all of the characters in my book. And so that is how I have a deep dive character on my Notion. I'll pull it up on the screen and show it to you. But that is how I am doing the main description of each character, is filling in this is the kind of person who, and a little bit when they were younger and a little bit now. So how do I figure this out for Lewis? So I have this tool. I know I want active verbs for him, and I know that I need to kind of get to the heart of like who he is, what this fear of vulnerability is, etc., etc. I can write out how this might manifest itself in the context of the book, because it all needs to be tied back to our story. He won't tell Isabella he likes her. He would keep her at a distance, and clearly deny he's feeling something. Even when he wants to be close to her, he would use a defense mechanism to move off. If she tries to say something that's kind of romantic or nice to him, or like asks him a deeper question, he brushes it off with a joke, or a prank, or something. In the play, he'll have a hard time acting in any emotional scenes. And instead of saying his lines, he'll be super over the top. He'll act like he doesn't care. He'll crack a joke, anything to deflect the tension, and that will create more conflict because he'll be disrupting the rehearsal process, and that affects the other characters. So at this point, I'm starting to get a really good sense of what's going on, and so I want to fill in this wound portion of that first chart, which I do with the Story Genius. And so that involves, I'm not going to get too into the process because I talked about Story Genius before. It's a great book. Go read it. If you haven't read it, just read it. It's great. Basically, it's writing out a description of a core past event that's really like shaped and helped create this misbelief. Some of the moments since that have cemented it. Write that out and go through the Story Genius process, and then I can kind of feed back and see how that loops into the anatomy of story and say, okay, his need is really to understand that vulnerability is a strength and to connect with others. He has to be willing to be himself, even when he's not authentically happy, and that by not doing so, he does hurt other people. He creates that a distance between them that can be hurtful and upsetting to others. So at this point, I feel like I more or less have him nailed. I see the connection between the play and his relationship with Isabella. He needs to learn the same lesson, fulfill the same need in order to succeed at both, which is perfect for my purposes because you'll be able to see how the flaw plays out in numerous aspects of his life, and it all connects to my overarching theme of the whole book, and it complicates the other characters' storylines as well by messing up the play, creating issues there. So it's great. And so at this point, I create my character description. It's not a description necessarily in the usual sense because I'm using my revelation about the active verbs, and they're the kind of person who. So here's what I have for him. He's the kid teachers sort of rolled their eyes at, but in a super good-natured way. He's jokey, but never overly disruptive. He toes the line, but never truly crosses it. He was the kid who'd yell out bits of the cha-cha slide at random times and get song lyrics like "Everybody clap your hands" or "Legend wait for it dairy" printed on a custom t-shirt as part of a joke for like the entire class to enjoy. He's also very protective of Shar. He and Arthur, his older brother, are both protective of her. He's the middle child. He felt overlooked sometimes. Some of his acting out and stuff, his showiness, his jokiness, big energy, was to get attention. He's also the only one of his siblings not to be artsy, and he actually has always wanted to try performing. He's afraid of looking stupid. It would be too vulnerable to put himself out there, to be compared to his siblings, and then to fail. So he does the play to spend time with Isabella, but also because it feels like a safe way to try performing. To the outside world, and what he's telling himself is that he doesn't want this. He doesn't care if he's good at it. He doesn't want to be in this play. He's just doing it to get close to a girl. He thinks he's cheated the system here. He'll get the girl he wants. He'll get what he wants. No vulnerability necessary. However, of course, he also is very protective and loves his sister, and she's like desperate for this play to go well. And so he's kind of going to be forced to have to open up and be vulnerable and actually perform. So you have those two things that are a little bit mutually exclusive there. All of which brings me to the second character technique I learned, which comes from writing the Breakout novel. And what it says, I think this is a quote specifically from the workbook. Invest your protagonist with two goals, needs, wants, longings, etc., that are in direct opposition to each other. Wanting two things that are mutually exclusive means having inner conflict, being torn in two directions, and that is what makes a character truly memorable. So I love this, and when I read this, so many things clicked for me. I've had a lot of conversations with other writers before about okay, so my character always has to want something, and at the start of the story, she wants something, but then the inciting incident happens, and she has to want something else, and so and I think that's really interesting, because you can, actually what this is saying is you can potentially use that. So at the beginning, the character wants to, succeed at one thing. It turns out that in order to get that, or they're being forced into doing something else, but they still want this other thing, and so if those things are mutually exclusive, you get some really fun, I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, conflict. So it's not just fears or things pulling the characters back, but they're kind of forced to choose between two people, two ways of living, or they're forced between two values. There's the anatomy of story. Maybe to get this one thing they want, maybe they really want to be, they want to be true to their beliefs. They want to be whatever those beliefs are, not necessarily religious, but they want to be true to them. But then it turns out that to get this other thing over here, they have to go against those beliefs. Conflict. Woo! So, Lewis wants to connect with others through acting in the play and by being with Isabella, but he simultaneously wants to protect himself from rejection and from the risk of ridicule. He also loves Shar, this is another thing, and he wants to help her. All of these things kind of start conflicting, right? So he wants to be with Isabella, he wants to do well for Charlotte, let's say that's over here, but he also wants to protect himself from rejection. He has this whole thing, he's figured it out, he can do this and get the girl and get everything he wanted without having to be vulnerable, and these things are mutually exclusive. He can't do well in the play without being vulnerable, and he can't protect himself from that risk if he's good in the play. Yes. So, because being bad, being rejected, and this is kind of what he's thinking inside, is that being a bad performer or being rejected by Isabella or whatever, if he doesn't care and isn't invested, because he isn't trying, that's so much better than being rejected after genuinely letting his guard down, opening up and actually trying to do something. So you can also think of it as he's simultaneously at the same time as wanting to do well in this show and to achieve connection with others, wants to be seen by his peers as unshakable. I'm the fun guy, the one who's always happy, who can always make you smile, and Isabella is just not having it. And then we get to the character arc summary. So remember, I had my summary at the beginning, and now I have sort of a deeper summary at the end. well, at the end of this process, which is Lewis starts off by responding to every situation that requires vulnerability with his defense mechanism, human. By the end, he conjures the bravery to be authentic both on stage and with Isabella. Now, of course, this is only the first part of the process. It sounds like very deep and very complicated, and I have a very small amount of time to get through all of this material because it's a lot of POVs, but we're going to put those securities aside for the moment and just acknowledge the fact that as I'm writing and as I'm figuring out how to tune and balance these POVs and such, the characters will continue to develop and change. But this process has given me a lot to go off of, and I feel like I really know my characters well enough now to start writing. So I would love to hear what you thought of those two kind of new tools, the active actionable verbs to describe the character, and the two conflicting objects of desire. Did you know about those before? Do you use something similar? I would love to hear about it. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps me and I really appreciate it. You can subscribe to get the videos more often if you like them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.